Hey, how's it going? I'm IlaGolden and welcome to my vlog. Okay, so last month I talked a little bit about writing protagonists and why I write protagonists the way I write protagonists, and my enjoyment for doing that. And I mentioned at the time that I should do a counter one to that and talk about antagonists. So that's what we're doing today. Just because why wait? We're now in February and it's time to talk about antagonists. So when I say antagonists, I don't necessarily mean bad guys. I mean antagonists in the sense that antagonists is actually supposed to be used as in the ones opposing the protagonists of your story. So your antagonists are not always bad people, they're not always the bad guys, they're just people in the path, in the way of the protagonist getting whatever it is they want from their journey, their quest, their story. So writing antagonists in a lot of ways can be a lot more interesting and a lot more fun than writing your protagonists, because you're not necessarily writing a bad character. You're just, as I said, writing the roadblock character, as it was. And as such, I've had some rather interesting antagonists which have sort of, or characters which have appeared to be the antagonists and have turned out to actually be part of the solution and part of the group of protagonists. And I think you can kind of have a lot more fun with expectations when it comes to your antagonists, because you can do that sort of that bait and switch, I think they call it. Obviously, you don't want to make it sort of like completely out of nowhere, but you can play with this idea of who is your antagonist and who is your protagonist. I think in some ways fairly easily on both angles. So you've got your hidden antagonists, which I think anybody who's read Echo would probably say that that's what you get in that story. The antagonist isn't necessarily obvious to begin with, and you've got a lot of antagonistic characters, or you've got a few antagonistic characters who may or may not turn out to be the primary antagonist, and then you've got a lot of protagonist like characters who also may or may not turn out to be the antagonist. So it's kind of, I like writing stories like that where it's not necessarily clear who the antagonist of the story is, because as I said, antagonists don't have to be bad people. They just have to be people who are ultimately getting in the way of the protagonist and their journey and their goals. So yeah, it's, I think, quite fun when you're writing and you have that sort of sense of people are going to think that this is the antagonist of the story when actually it's X, Y, and Z, and it's going to be a lot of fun when that reveal is sort of made. And I think one of the ones where the seeming antagonists or potential antagonists turned out to be protagonists of the story, and one of the ones I had the most fun with this. Like, again, I'm going to be mentioning the tales, guys. Read the tales. Read my free fan fiction. There are links always in the description below. Yeah, so in the tales, I think it is the 5th book. Maybe the 6th book. I don't remember. In one of them, you have this trio of characters who don't speak, although they get a lot across despite being non-verbal characters, and they are initially rather intimidating and rather strange, and a lot of the protagonists have this sense that maybe they're the bad guys. And they are some of my favorite, one in particular, but they are amongst some of my favorite characters, and it's kind of a shame they only appear in the one book. because they are amazing. Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite, times where I've sort of played with the idea and sort of presented these characters as being antagonists, and then ultimately revealed them to be the protagonists of the story. And likewise, again in the tales, you do have one character who, when you first meet them, they are a protagonist. They are one of the good guys, and you go through quite a long journey with them, and they're not like a main character, but you spend quite you do get to know a fair amount about them, and you do sort of care about this particular character. And then in the 8th book, the last book of the first part, and before it goes on to the next generation, yeah, I think that's the 8th book, things change and said character becomes the antagonist, and I really kind of enjoyed writing that, and sort of getting that character to sort of reach that point, whether it was my original intention for them to sort of end up there or not. I think in terms of the emotions that you go through, and I think this is one of the reasons why that is my favourite book in the series, is there is so much raw emotion going on. There's so much depth and whatever else going on, and part of the reason for that is the antagonists themselves, is somebody, and it's a situation that you don't quite expect sort of before you go into it. And yeah, I like antagonists like that. I like antagonists that you can feel something for. I think, purely seeing things as the idea that the antagonist is just somebody standing in the way of the protagonist, it's kind of important when you can to show sort of both sides of the situation, to sort of show that they are human, they are doing these things for a reason. I mean, you can't always. It does depend on the nature of the story. It depends on the nature of the particular antagonist that you're dealing with. But I like, when I can, to very much have this sort of idea that they're not necessarily a bad person, or they've not always been a bad person, or there is a reason why they're at this point and they are standing in the way of your protagonist, and they are doing the things that they are doing. That there's always, I think, if I can get that across, a reason. Sometimes you can't get that across. I mean, I'd very much say with the Hyena Boy in particular, I mean, I'm hoping, crossed, in the edits that I'm doing, and in the edits that I'm sort of giving it, to sort of give some not redeeming qualities, because I don't particularly like the antagonist for a very good reason. So I don't necessarily want to redeem his character, but I do want to sort of show there is more depth there is more going on there that the audience isn't necessarily privy to, because it is a first person story, so you're only getting one side of it. You're only getting Jay's point of view and Jay's opinion on everything, so of course it's going to be incredibly biased. But I'm sort of slipping in these little details here and there in the hopes of, allowing readers to try to form their own theories and opinions as to why this situation is the way it is, and how this particular character has reached this mentality. I'm also kind of hoping they sort of do that with a lot of the characters in Night Boy, actually. I'm not saying they all need to be psychoanalyzed or anything like that. It's just in terms of what sort of goes on in the story, and and stuff like that. There's a lot there, and yeah, I think that's kind of why I like writing antagonists the way that I do. Even if I'm not giving sort of clear XYZ motives for why they're doing the things that they do, and how they've turned out the way that they've turned out. I think I do my best to try to give subtle hints, subtle clues that there is more going on, that there is something there that isn't necessarily being said. so that the readers can sort of fill in the blanks a little bit and sort of make their own decisions as to why characters are the way they are, and how situations have ended up being the way they are. And yeah, I think, yeah. I think I do a good job of that most of the time. But again, nobody can do a good job of it all the time. Nobody can get it perfectly right all the time. Because, you know, writing is a fine art and it's a fine skill, and it requires a lot of nuance. And certainly when you're first drafting something, you're not necessarily thinking about all the little nuances. You're just trying to get the story down. And sort of as you develop a bit more and as you sort of keep going, it becomes easier to sort of find those little nuances and those little details that either will humanize your antagonists or will demonize your antagonists. And sometimes when you sort of go in with the intention of your antagonist not necessarily being that bad, and sort of having this sort of like really good reason for why they are the way they are, but that good reason might not necessarily fully justify the way that they are, and how they sort of come to be the way that they are. And then you sort of have to question, well, is there more going on, or is it just not worth worrying about? Certainly with what I'm writing now, the Amhart series, and I think that's the first time I've actually name dropped it. I've sort of mentioned I'm working on a project at the moment, but I've not name dropped it before now. It is referred to at the moment as being Amhart. It's not necessarily going to remain being called that, but that's kind of its working title. I think that's kind of why I've not name dropped it properly. But yeah, no, the antagonists who are being dealt with at the moment, some are definitely more nuanced than others, and it's very interesting, sort of finding out and learning about them as and when I sort of can, because there is a lot of emphasis on the protagonists at the moment and the relationships between the protagonists at the moment. So it's sort of trying to get these details in, and trying to find opportunities to sort of slip these details in. But again, it's the first draft, it's the first writing of it, so I can worry about all those sort of details later. And I'm sure I will. But yeah, no, that's I think kind of where I am, and sort of how I feel when it comes to writing my antagonists. I do my best to try to make them as humanized as possible, depending on the type of story that I'm writing, and the point of views that you're getting throughout the story. And I sort of, you know, and do my best if I can't necessarily get it in plainly, to sort of try and give subtler little hints or whatever else, to try to sort of maybe give something more to the characters than is, you know, necessarily obvious. But at the end of the day, you know, it's just how I tend to think and write about my antagonists. I kind of like them to be fun, or not necessarily fun characters, but I like them to be characters. I like them to have their own personalities, and very sort of clear personalities. And I take writing them as seriously as I take writing my protagonists. And I think you do kind of need to sort of do that. Yeah. Not sure what else I can say on this one, so I think I'm going to wrap this up here. Okay, so next time, how do I put this? Next time, I want to talk about the idea of rewriting fantasy. And what I mean by that is taking pre-existing fantasy concepts and putting my own twist on it. Yeah. Yeah. So rewriting fantasy, that's what we're talking about next time. Hopefully my explanation for that made sense. Okay, so hope you guys have all enjoyed watching this one. I think I found this more sensical, if that's a word, than the one I did on protagonists, but then I wasn't prepared for the one that I did on protagonists, so you guys can forgive me that, right? Okay, so like I said, I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I will see you next time. See ya! If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to check out some of my others, and if you like what you see, please like and subscribe. See ya!